5 secrets that Cinema 4D doesn't want you to know about. No, but these are 5 like really good tips and secrets that are kind of like, they're just not talked about a lot, and they're really cool features that are inside of C4D, and they're really good for helping you learn. So hopefully showing you these will help you kind of dive in and get started learning. And speaking of learning, Mind in Motion is getting some upgrades. It's getting a whole new chapter on particles coming very soon, as well as a lot more stuff that are kind of a lot has changed just in 2025, and I've updated some videos and stuff in there, as well as replacing some things that relied on Quixel that now are just going to be available to use free assets that everybody has. So definitely check that out for the link below if you want to learn Cinema 4D and Redshift. These are basically going to be things that I wish I had back in the day when I was starting C4D that people have now that we didn't have back then. That was like 8-9 years ago. And today, these are basically going to be those things that are really going to help you learn Cinema 4D and Redshift together and kind of help teach yourself and kind of cut through some of that noise to give you some of that jump start into learning C4D, getting comfortable with it, and getting comfortable with Redshift, because 3D software is a lot, and there are a lot of facets and a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of information out there about it. If you're serious about learning Redshift and C4D, I highly recommend my Mind in Motion Primer class. It is basically a jump start into becoming comfortable with Redshift and C4D. It is very up to date, and it walks you through all the foundations of understanding both C4D and Redshift simultaneously. If that's something you're interested in, check that out. There's a link for that below. It's also very affordable, so please check that out. All right, cool. So the first thing that's really cool that they've added recently inside of Cinema 4D is actually tutorials built into Cinema 4D, kind of. So if you come here to the asset browser, which is the most underrated tool of C4D, this asset browser is the best. Basically, so what you want to do is you want to open that up, and if you scroll down here to example scenes, you see here we have tutorials, and inside of here you have stuff like interface tour, material basics, lighting dome, tutorial, selecting and transferring. Okay, so let's go ahead and do like interface tour. Double click that, and it opens up with a little pop-up window and a scene, and you say like start tutorial, and it says okay, the object manager's up here, and it shows you a little video. It says click something, okay, and then we hit next. And then it pops up an on-screen display of doing stuff like that. So this is like a really great way to follow along at your own pace, just doing the basics. So these are really great. There's a few. I hope they keep adding more of these. They've got the basics of materials here. They've got a pair of scissors. And it says, okay, here's this. And you see this little pop-up, the material manager here. Very nice way, because obviously this little ball with a line under it, like if I'm new to 3D, I'm not going to know that means materials. I don't know what the hell that thing is. Like a magic ball. I don't know. For a psychic. So yeah, stuff like that. And so hopefully it helps kind of, it says to double click in here to create a new material. Don't do that. There's a better way. We learn a better way to set up stuff inside of the Mind in Motion Primer. But another cool way is if you click this little ball right here, boop, it pops up with every Redshift material that exists in your asset browser, which means you can add to it whenever you want. Like scrolling down through all these cool fabrics and stuff, you find these 10 really cool looking ones that are from my free material pack. Wow, hashtag ad, but it's free. So go ahead and download that. There's a link for that below. It just drags and drops them in. So now all we have to do is like, we'll put the concrete on the cyc, and maybe we'll put like this crazy rubber on the scissors, and then we can hit render on that. And we should have a pretty cool looking scene. And just like that, it just drags and drops them in. There we go. Pretty neat. So if we wanted to, we could just grab like this worn studio material, throw it down on the studio, and grab the rainbow and put that on the scissors maybe, and take a look at what that looks like. There we go. You can see that we're going to get this crazy cool rainbowy glass scissors on some cool worn studio floor. So cool. Yeah, check that out. Now it says in the tutorial to double click here to create a material. That gives you a cool basic standard material. That's fine. But I actually show you how to set up something better and more streamlined for your workflow that you can customize inside of the Mind in Motion Primer, where you create this little button here, where if I click this button, it creates a material. And this material already has the bump map, the displacement map set up, as well as my favorite nodes that I like to use. And you can customize this to do whatever you want. So there you go. If you want that, that's in the Mind in Motion Primer as well. And you can even adjust all of the settings and things and save all of that to whatever you want. And you can have multiple. You can just add them on and have a bunch of things. If you do a lot of brand stuff and you know you're going to need certain colors and things, boom. There you go. So yeah, this new tutorial thing is pretty awesome for new users, especially. It's pretty cool. The second thing that I think is incredibly useful that a lot of people don't talk about is the fact that you can come in here to anything that you have in the scene, and you're curious about like what it does, what it is, whatever, radius, type, standard type. We can right click this and go down to show help. And whenever you click show help, it'll pop up inside of C4D, this like mini web browser, basically, that shows you exactly what you clicked on. Now it shows you the different types of spheres, things like that, and what those look like, as well as brings you up the list of everything that you possibly could learn here. So everything is there. The search features aren't amazing, but there's a couple caveats to searching these things that maybe might trip up some new users. So let's go ahead and just type in clouds. And here you see you have a irradiance point cloud. I don't want that. I want to learn about clouds. Oh, volumetric clouds. Let's click that. Cool. So if I scroll down through here, I see all these clouds. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm learning how to make the noise of the clouds and stuff. Cool. But something seems off about this. And that's the fact that this is using the sun, the physical sky, but it's using it with an ST by it. Now, my sky doesn't have an ST. That's because my sky is Redshift based and ST is not Redshift. So there's still lingering things from the pre-Redshift merge, basically, that can trip people up if they don't know. There's not like the easiest way to tell between whether it's Redshift based or C4D standard material based when you're looking it up. There's not really a great way to do that, but just know that everything that you see here now is only going to be Redshift friendly. You're not going to see anything inside of C4D now when your Redshift render is set to Redshift that you can't use. That is a huge advantage over what it was like a couple years ago. But so what we need to do is actually come in here and go to Redshift Cinema 4D, and now we'll type in clouds. And now we'll see we've got global illumination, blah, 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 volume shader. That's probably what we want. Or is it standard volume shader? Let's do that one. Anytime you see anything that's like standard over the old one, standard material and standard volume shader are both better. Basically, anything that says standard is going to be the preferred method when it comes to Redshift, okay? But that is more of a cloud that I wanted to see. And it's like, oh, it's cool. It's rendered by Disney. That's fun. But the cool thing is you come in here, it's got all these cool facts and things, how to actually set that up. Detailing how to create the noise and stuff actually on the density, which is really cool to give it more of a natural look. But also on top of that, you actually get a download of this cloud for free. And there's more than one instance where you can get free things from this, which is a really cool way to learn. The only thing that kind of sucks is the fact that you can't just like do a broad search for all the download scenes like Maxon. You have all these really cool things that are great for learning, but nobody can find them. You've got to set up a just downloads tab here that has all this stuff, because here's the Redshift Cloud Multiscatter demo. There's also a Redshift demo of VDBs that's available. Yes, that's cool. You've added that, but then you also have even more things that you can download and stuff. And I want to just be able to find all of those. And I can't search like .zip. That doesn't do anything. But there's a lot of cool stuff. Like if we type in skin and we come in here to skin, we can see it says like the shaders deprecated, use standard material instead. That's very common. Basically, a lot of this stuff was built with the legacy just Redshift material, and now you want to use the standard material instead. But you do get access to this cool free model, which is great. It shows you how to set this up and everything. 3D scan store, and now you can see it's actually this girl instead of the guy, and it looks even better. So there you go. But there you go. You can see you get access to all this stuff as well as learning on how to do this. They've got tutorials and things built in. The funny thing is most of the images are actually Blender, which is great. But yeah. So yeah, the show help tool, incredibly useful for finding very quick niche things or just broad stroke searching through things. Like if I just want to learn about the material shader inside of Redshift or global illumination, I want to know the difference between brute force versus irradiant point cloud. This is a great way to understand what GI is, all this stuff. So just spend some time in the help, and that's actually going to be a pretty good way to do it. The number one complaint I have that they need to change about this is if I come in here and I search skin, right, and I want to look that up, I'm like, okay, cool. I've got my skin settings, and I want to learn about hair. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's get in here about hair. Very cool. It says use principled hair. Okay, we'll use that. Ooh, that's very pretty. But let's go ahead and say, okay, actually, I want to just go back to skin. Let's hit the back button here. This is tune. I never looked at tune because it's not actually back. It's actually up on this list here. So just how do things like this get buy. Like they're like, that's fine. That's dumb. Don't do that. Okay, come on, Maxon. Anyway, that's it. That's my gripe. So those two right there are pretty big for like a broad stroke of understanding and applications of how to use C4D and Redshift. Let's talk about one of my preferred methods of learning, and I still use this today, and that is just simply to go into the asset browser and not go into tutorials, but actually just go in here to example scenes and scroll down here, and you see we have all of these scenes, and you can see the difference between C4D based scenes and Redshift based scenes. But you have all these things, and there's a few that are here that are behind the Maxon One paywall, like this cool book one that will just generate books, a kind of bookcase. You got some things from people, whatever, arrows, things like that, that are pretty neat. But the main thing I would say to do, like this campfire, what I would do, or this like capsules fabric promo or the liquid promo, these are pretty cool. And what you want to do is, like, I want to learn how to make these liquids. Well, you just right click and say load, downloads those, opens it up. Voila. And now if you come in here to the materials, you see we have all of these liquids, and you can see what they look like, how this is lit. Everything's organized well. And you kind of just come in here and kind of reverse engineer these things. The only thing I would say is a lot of times just they're not always the most up to date. Like this is using photons. We don't want photons. We're going to use brute force, stuff like that. It's just faster and newer. But yeah, but like you get an idea of what this like juice looks like and all this stuff, and like IPR versus bucket mode, which would allow us to do that. And the only thing is, like, the only thing you really can't learn from a lot of this stuff is render settings, because everybody's GPU is different, and they set most of their stuff up with the idea that everybody needs to be on a Mac at least. So they dumb everything down. No, but they do use stuff like Oyden instead of optics, because Macs don't have optics, even though optics is much better and stuff like that. So yeah, they have it all kind of simplified down. So you can see you can come in here and you get access to like these cool vases and stuff. Anything that's in here you can take, which is neat. But I wish all of these vases were in the asset browser. Let's go to models, type in vase. There's a few, but obviously they're not here. Well, let's just grab all these vases, click and drag them in. That's what I would say is my number 4. We're jumping to that really quick in the middle of this. And that is that you can just take things from any scene, anything you create, anything anyone else has created or anything. If there's something you like, grab it, throw it into the asset browser. You can create categories and organize that. Categories are folders, and put them wherever you want. But now I actually have like this cool abstract vase, which, you know, obviously when I searched for vases, it didn't pop up, but now I have an abstract vase, and I can just click and drag and put it in there like that. And there it is, just how I wanted it. So we can go back to just a default blank empty scene that we have, drag that, plop it in, boom. And now we, you know, can look at that and it's ready to go. And we get the materials, everything with it. So very useful way to speed up your things. Search through the asset browser, find stuff, organize it, create your own. If you have a bunch of downloads of things, a lot of stuff you use, bring them in, throw them in the asset browser. Definitely do that. Okay, take advantage of the asset browser. That's the best thing. I'm very passionate about the asset browser, apparently. Okay. But yeah, definitely check that out. Let's go back to what I was talking about with the liquids and how to, and another thing about learning these things is you have these materials, which, let's see, does honey exist in here? Again, we've got materials here. We've got liquid honey. It's behind the Maxon One paywall, but here it's not. So grab that, put it in there. Boom. Now you have honey for free. Okay. But yeah, but not only that, you also can just come in here and just reverse engineer these things. Check out the settings of this. I just realized there's no base color. Okay, they're using it actually with a balance between transmission and subsurface, which is pretty cool. Actually, I would like to take the subsurface and turn it down a little. I never like to go all the way to 1. But yeah, you can start to see like, okay, what values are, what they look like, and how they set up stuff like that. So you can create your own, as well as like the juice, the wood base. We've got these cool texture maps and stuff. We've got this nice wood white kind of base that they put on this. And you can see kind of how that's driven and things like that, where that's plugged in, what the IOR is, and things like that. So if you like what you see, just dive into it and reverse engineer it. There you go. And that goes with any material that you have access to, like this speckled plaster. Let's just load that in and download that and open that up and see. You see some of this stuff is like, looks very intimidating. One thing I would say, okay, here's a free tip that's not one of the 5 wish I knew earlier tips, but basically if you get things and everything's kind of crazy and all over the place and you get lost in here, which is very easy to do starting out, like I teach in the Mind in Motion, is this little window is down here, but also you can hit Shift L and that will bring up and organize these things for you. I'm also putting together a PDF of all my most useful shortcuts for C4D and Redshift that will be available soon. So stay tuned to get a hold of that. It'll be free. Yeah, so you come in here and figure out, okay, what's actually changed color here? What is this node? It looks like color constant node. Okay, so that goes into a composite, which is being paired with a triplanar ramp, which is just a texture going in there with the scalar ramp, which is just a digital, like a non-color version of a color ramp. It's like 0 to 1 rather than black to white. I don't know why a lot of people prefer to use that. I guess because they can hone in actual digits, but I prefer the visual aspects of black and white anyway. But that's based in here, and that's being applied to multiply, and that's coming in here. Okay, so you can kind of see how things are built, and then how things like division things are being used, but changing the size, the value of a float, the value node, stuff like that. So you can really get overwhelmed, or you can really dive in and reverse engineer some things, which is pretty cool. We could add in a plaster, put the plaster on there, and see what that looks like instead, which should look pretty good. So again, beyond just reverse engineering materials, this is the best way to just dive into the asset browser, and you can go to disciplines and choose like product viz, and there's some cool breakdowns of that. Not as much as the one from Patrick 4D, which is kind of nice. But the main thing is you want to go in here and go to like features, and this is really where you want to just scroll down past all this stuff and just take a look at some of these things. This is a great way to figure out some scene node type of things, how those work, as well as just like particle systems, things like that. This is a great way. Pyro, there's some really, really nice pyro settings. We can just load up this campfire, and they all will have readmes that give you a little more information about them, as well as like what to do and stuff like that. So you can figure out things like right there, we have a fire that looks like nothing, but when we hit play, we'll get both an emitter, which is going to obviously put out the little sparks, but then also a pyro scene that shows you how to create the fire. So now you can dive into that pyro output and look at the pyro settings and figure out, okay, this kind of thing is a voxel size of this. They're only doing one sub-step, okay, and start reverse engineering these things, the density, buoyancy, the temperature, the amount of fuel, all this stuff, and you kind of just get an idea of that. And again, if you just want to grab a campfire scene without opening up the full like scene, you could just grab this and toss it in the asset browser. Definitely check that out. I mean, the asset browser is great. There are some learning things that are hidden behind the Max on One paywall, like different modifiers and things. There's one that's pretty nice, but yeah, and there's some really useful ones for everyday projects, like this one. No, I do love this one. Like, this is like, I wish there was more stuff like this because it's just fun and it looks cool. So whoever did the pyro stuff, they clearly like made useful things and had fun with it, which is pretty awesome. That's great. Obviously, you can just replace that with a flamethrower or dragon. So far we've got the tutorials in the system, the show help, the asset browser, reverse engineering things, as well as the fact that you can grab anything and put it into the asset browser and use it forever. The only caveat for the asset browser thing is if you do upgrade, like when you're going to go from 2025 to 2026, basically all you need to do is you go here and you find the things that you like that you've added in there. Let's like the starter material, and you're just going to right click and say export latest version, or copy to database, or move to database, and you can just send it over to the new version. Okay, so that's it. It doesn't automatically go over. And now it's time for the fifth thing that I think was like for beginners, what is really important and a very confusing point for a lot of people starting out And that is the various types of rendering, how to actually render out and see and have it look correct. Like, what is IPR? What is bucket? What does that mean? What is RT? What is the difference between the IPR render view versus the render view, Redshift render view versus the render to picture viewer? Like, how do I, there's so many things that seem like they're the same thing. So let's talk about that. Here's my first rule, and I say it's a rule, it's more like parlay for a pirate, right? But basically it's a guideline. Got it? Okay, we're gonna, if you want to use the Redshift IPR viewport, you can. I don't recommend this. One, they're trying to make this look better and stuff, which is nice, but it does not look as good as if you come in here and go to Redshift render view and do the IPR here. It's just better, faster, and cleaner. And you obviously you can like work in this area, but it's just as easy if you have the real estate on your screen to just grab these 3 lines and dock it right next to it. So now, you know, you work and you have like that feedback. Perfect. On a note of the IPR viewer, to make it really quick, what you can do is come down here to the Redshift settings and progressive passes, set it to 128 or even as low as 64. It depends on how detailed your project is. If you have a lot of small details, you might want to turn that up to like 256. By default, it's up to 1000, but you can lower that number down. Turn on denoising. You can use Orden if you want, but it's not as good as Optics. Optics is going to be based on an RTX card. You definitely also want this on, and that's it. Okay, that's the best way to speed up your IPR viewport. That's probably the best way to speed up your IPR viewport and try to strike that balance. It's going to be very dependent on your card. That's like, there's no, dude, there's a lot of tutorials for like, do this for to optimize your renders. There is no blanket setting for everything, okay? Everything is very dependent on your card, and I teach that in the Mind in Motion primer. We set it up so you can figure out and do the test to find out what's best for your machine, because every GPU has so many variables that affect render time, including max and the RTX cards and stuff like that. So we dive into actually setting it up for your machine so you can get it right. But yeah, like 64 is going to be really fast, but when we start adding in things like a bunch of scratches and stuff, the denoiser is just going to buff those right out. So yeah, there's a balance, and it's all about balance, and you'll figure that out as you dive more into 3D, that there's always a balance between quality and performance that you're always balancing on. Now, on a side note of that, basically, the best thing that Redshift has ever done, that's just, the people that are starting out now have no idea how good they have it. They can come in here and they can go to sampling, and there's a thing called automatic sampling. That is so good. Make sure that's on. Use that. So now if you want to control the quality of your render, okay, this is it. Threshold. This is the noise threshold. Like, how much crap do you want to allow your scene? The higher the value here, the noisier your scene will be. It will allow more noise. The faster it will be, the worse it may look. Sliding this down, very, very small noise threshold will make it look very, very clean, but it will take much longer to render. So finding that balance. Okay, but that's it. You just have to come in here and you'd have to figure out how many sample minimums, and you have to do samples for reflection, refraction, lighting, volume, subsurface, and you can still come in here and dive in and do all of that stuff. But if you're starting out, this guy right here, this is your best friend. This allows you to just make stuff, try to figure out the rest of the scene, and focus on the very basics of the render settings before like diving in. Okay. Included with the IPR, I would also go ahead and talk about what is the difference between production, RT, what is IPR, what is bucket, what was everybody talking about? So basically, IPR is whenever you hit this play button. This is the interactive progressive rendering IPR. And so that is like, obviously, that's not even listed here in my Redshift render settings. What the hell? It's progressive passes. Cool, but you have bucket quality. You're not going to see the bucket quality unless you set it to bucket render, which, in case you didn't know, bucket means square, obviously, and this grid of 3 squares obviously means bucket render, right? I mean, that's obvious, but if you do hover over it, it does say it. So what's the difference? What do you need to know? The very, very, very bare minimum basics is IPR is what you use while you're working. Bucket is what you use when you're ready to actually make a render, okay? And yes, there is going to be a difference in the way they look, especially with things like glass or liquids. Anytime you're going to do anything with subsurface or liquids or motion blur, stuff like that, the IPR has its limits. And we talk about all of those in the render settings of Mind and Motion as well. But basically, the bucket render is what you want to get a final product. And yes, anytime you can still do IPR with bucket, but it's actually not IPR. It's just going to be interactive, and it's just going to render those buckets across. Okay, and you may say, well, your buckets look weird. Okay, that's because I have my buckets optimized for my GPU and stuff and things like that. And we talk about finding that out and all the tests and stuff that I've done to find the thing you want. Okay, there's that. Now, on the note of IPR, we can come down here and hit play, and voila, we have this animation. Now, obviously, the IPR is not keeping up with that in real time. That's fine. That's pretty common with animation. You're not going to get that. Cool. This ain't Unreal Engine, okay? That's the difference between real time and that. Now, this does have an RT, which is real time, and you can try it. It has a lot of limitations. It's not quite there yet. If you're expecting it to be like Lumen from Unreal Engine, think again. It ain't that. But it is kind of neat. And it does have some really cool features. And we can actually say, render this. It's going to basically bake it all like it does. So now we actually have RT. It had to go through and kind of cook it all just like Unreal Engine does at the beginning and stuff. But it's a very simple texture and things. And now let's see how it works with real time. Hit play. It definitely keeps up much better. Is it real time? No. Nope. No, but it's pretty cool. It's getting there. It's not bad. It's definitely faster. But yeah. So let's talk about the actual like bucket rendering. So inside the render settings here, you always want to make sure you're inside of Redshift when it comes down to this. So this is actually going to be like the real meat of this 5th tip, is understanding like how to render things out of Redshift and C4D. So there's 2 rendering engines. There's production and RT. Now inside of production, there are 2 different things. There's buckets rendering and progressive rendering. Now you don't see these options here, but they do exist. And if you go to the advanced tab underneath sampling, that's where you can really see them. Now you'll see interactive rendering. It's going to use progressive. That means right here. And the final rendering is going to use bucket. That's when you click this button right here to render. Or because if you click this button, it's going to be a still, right? And that's kind of the thing that trips up a lot of people, because they're like, okay, how do I render out an animation? Because I can come in here and I go to output and I choose, okay, all frames. I want this animation. And I click this. It just says one image. I want the whole animation. How do I do that? Well, you actually need to set up the render to picture viewer. So now there's not just render view, there's picture view. And so things get confused. The main thing that you want to keep in mind is everything that you set up inside of here, underneath the render settings here, is what is going to be sent over to the picture viewer. Now, besides the fact of just the render to picture viewer button here, which this will actually do the entire animation and it will just start. But here's my biggest tip for starting out, especially as someone, because I was coming from After Effects and like Premiere, like I was a video editor and motion graphics guy and VFX guy. And so when I came over, the main thing you want to remember is that frames or still images are your best friend when it comes to 3D. It seems counterintuitive even for an animation, but what you want to make sure you do is in your output files, you want to make sure you're saving image sequences. And the reason for that is basically if you were to do a video file, which you can do, but they always kind of come out darker, at least they used to. And the thing is, if something happens, your power goes out, or you need to change something, you realize something is wrong from frame like 80 to frame 100, but everything from frame 0 to frame 80 was fine. If you're trying to render out an MP4 and you stop it, you lose it. You don't get like from frame 0 to 80, so you lose all progress. It's like starting over fresh every time. Whereas if you were doing an image sequence, you could stop at frame 80, come back in here, change this from frame 80 and go up to frame 100 if you wanted to, and do another thing, and then just add them together in post, which saves you a bunch of time, especially rendering things that take a long time. So there you go on top of that. But the best feature that nobody talks about is the render Q. Okay, this is it. This is my last final tip. I know tip 5 has been like 20 tips, but it's all basically render related. But basically, the way render queue works is this is a way to just queue up things. You will need to save your scene, but you can see how I have all these things saved. But basically, what you can do is you just queue up your scenes. So when I created like a headphone ad for Mind in Motion course, I just had different scenes. I queued them all up and let them all go overnight. This is how you can render out 10 different projects overnight versus sitting here and going, okay, render to picture viewer, and then your machine is locked up. Pretty much you can't work on anything else while this is going. So you want to make sure you use the render queue if you're going to have multiple things, multiple takes, multiple cuts, stuff like that, multiple projects that you've been working on throughout the day, and you need to render them all out overnight. Very, very easy to set that up. And it just basically, you can just save it and set up the render settings and do it. The very, very last thing that I'll say, it trips up a lot of people, is the fact that you can come in here to your output and have a frame rate of 24 or 30, whatever you want your images to be. This does not change the frame rate of your scene. They're not linked. This is a separate thing. So you have to come in here to your scene, hit Control D, and go to the actual frame rate here underneath the projects. And those can be different, and it doesn't change it here. So you want to make sure that your frame rate of your project and your video match. All right. And again, we cover all this in the Mind in Motion primer as well. So definitely, again, check that out. But hopefully those 5 things are just kind of things that I think a lot of people don't talk about, and they're really helpful and really cool to figure those things out and start learning on your own and just kind of dive in and demystify a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of cool tools out there about it. But again, the asset browser is one of the greatest things that C4D has over other softwares, I think, to help you learn the ability to reverse engineer and stuff like that, as well as the new tutorials. But again, check out my stuff. Yeah, but I'm also going to put together a list of my favorite YouTubers and stuff for training and learning C4D. So subscribe and like if you liked this and you want to see more. So just definitely get notified when that comes out. Ring that little bell, I guess. I think that's what that does. I don't hate the play, I hate the game. All right. Have a good day or night. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. See ya.